Europe in the early 20th century was a tense place. Germany trying to compete with Britain on the seas, the French and the Russians having forged a secret alliance, the Ottomans being nearly kicked out of the Balkan, and it seemed like Europe was heading into a great war. The nail in the coffin was the assassination of Franz Ferdinand, the heir to the Habsburg throne, by the Serbian Black Hand, which outraged the Austrians. They accused Serbia of having staged the incident, and thus they declared war. The Russians then entered the war to support their Slavic brothers, while Germany moved quickly to support its Austro-Hungarian ally. Although the Germans performed pretty well at the start, the Austrians were facing difficulty. The Russians were pushing into Galician territory, while Serbia proved to be more difficult to overrun than expected. All in all, it seemed that Austria was the weak underbelly of the Central Powers. The situation became worse when the Italians, which were promised Austrian land after the war, joined the Entente. Bulgaria joined the Central Powers in 1915, which did greatly benefit the Austrians as they were finally able to take over Serbia, and for a time it looked as if the Central Powers were going to win the war. In 1918, Russia had the Communist Revolution and was forced to sign the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, which effectively knocked the Russians out of the game. However, just as the war seemed secured for the Central Powers, the Americans joined the Entente side, while the Balkan campaign quickly forced the Bulgarians to sign an armistice. Revolutions rocked the empire from all sides as the Italians marched into Tyrol. The empire was collapsing from the inside out as the Hungarian portion of the empire declared its independence. Finally, in 1921, the treaties of Saint-Germain-en-Laye and Trianon officially put an end to the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and Austria would never gain the influence it once had. But what if that didn't happen? In our timeline, in early 1917, Kaiser Karl secretly attempted to make a separate peace with the Entente through what would later be dubbed as the Sixtus Affair, named after Karl's brother-in-law, Prince Sixtus of Bourbon-Parma. The peace proposal was sent to France, in which Austria accepted the general terms for peace. Alsace-Lorraine would go to France, Serbia and Belgium would be respected as independent states, and Constantinople would be seized by the Russians. However, the peace deal further than that was vague, as there were no mentions of Austrian land being awarded to the Italians nor the Serbs. Also, a few days earlier, the French Prime Minister Aristide Briand had resigned, and his successor Alexandre Ribot was unwilling to sign a separate peace deal with Austria. In the end, these negotiations went nowhere, as Austria was humiliated on the world stage, which further increased their dependency on the German Empire for survival. So how can we change this? Well, there are two factors that prevented this peace deal from going through in our timeline. First of all, we have to change the date of the negotiations to a few days earlier. Why is this important? Well, on the 17th of March, Briand resigned from the position of Prime Minister, while the Sixtus Affair took place on the 24th. If we want to have any reasonable chance for this peace deal to be accepted, we have to schedule the negotiations to at least before the 17th. Secondly, and most importantly, there is the matter of Serbia, Russia, Italy, and Romania. All of these nations had territorial claims on the Habsburg Empire, with the latter two having joined the war with the explicit goal of achieving these territorial ambitions. In our timeline, the Sixtus Affair did little to resolve these disputes. So, in this timeline, we're going to change that. Austria strikes with a more comprehensive peace deal. South Tyrol, Istria, and Dalmatia is awarded to the Italians, Croatia and Bosnia to the Serbs, Galicia to the Russians, and Romanian majority regions of Transylvania to Romania. This change should help get the minor powers, as well as Russia, on board with this peace deal, and even possibly lead to a more stable Habsburg Empire in the future. Does this mean that this secures Austrian exit out of the war? Absolutely not. The idea that Austria can just leave a major war that they started would be unacceptable to the German Empire, but for the sake of this scenario, let's roll with it. Austria officially signs peace in 1917 and exits the war. So what's next for Europe and the whole world? But before we continue, if you enjoy the content so far, consider subscribing. This is my first video and it would really help out the channel if you do so. Anyway, let's get back with the video. News-rich Berlin. Austria has signed peace with the Entente. Germany is filled with outrage. The Kaiser was considering invading the empire to force Austria back into the war, but the German troops were busy with France and Russia, so the Habsburg Empire is safe from any German invasion for now. For the Central Powers, this peace deal is terrible. Austria had to release and respect Serbia as an independent state, which means that Bulgaria is now forced to continue fighting them, while Greece fully joins the war on the Entente side, which puts even more pressure on the Bulgarians. For the Russians, the timing of this event is perfect. Russia recently had a revolution which deposed the Tsar and installed a semi-democratic provisional government, and now, with the Austrian exit out of the war, the provisional government can propagandize the event as a Russian victory over the Austrians, greatly increasing their popularity. This will become important for later. Bulgaria soon collapses, leaving the road to Constantinople open for the Allies, as Britain continues to march into the Middle East. The Ottomans soon sued for peace. The Russians, being in a better position than in our timeline, are able to halt the German advance into Eastern Europe. Even better for the young Russian Republic, due to its support being strengthened by the Sixtus affair, Lenin doesn't get the chance to initiate the October Revolution, which led to the collapse of the provisional government and the start of Soviet Russia in our timeline. With American forces flooding the front lines daily and with the Russians posing serious resistance, it's very likely that the revolution in Germany forces the Kaiser to abdicate, similar to our timeline. And thus, the war is over and the victorious powers meet in Paris to discuss the future of the Central Powers. The peace deals in the West end up almost exactly the same as our timeline, while in the East, Russia sees minor expansion into Polish-majority territories in Germany, while giving Poland autonomy in the Russian Empire and losing Finland. Now, you may be asking yourself, why on earth would Russia lose land after they won a war? And I'm glad you asked. You see, Finland was in a personal union with the Russian Empire, and since the Tsar was deposed by the February Revolution, there is no more legal basis for Finland to remain united with Russia. As per the Ottomans, they are completely dismantled. Britain fails to keep its promise to Russia about Constantinople, instead turning the city into an international zone, which practically meant that the British would take over the city. Meanwhile, Kemal would continue the fight to revert the worst of the treaty, but all his efforts are futile. Russia and Greece would both overrun the Turkish state, ruining any potential the young republic had. Overall, Europe is changed significantly. Russia doesn't turn into the USSR, which, as we will soon see, will have profound implications for the future. Similarly to our timeline, Germany still endures an economic crisis, and the US would come to the rescue. In Italy, even though they received more land than they did in our timeline, ultranationalism still rises. The issues in Italian society run way deeper than just some territorial expansion, so I don't see the rise of Mussolini being avoided. Conversely, the Great Depression is significantly altered. Russia, instead of being the isolated USSR of our timeline, is a full and cooperating member of the global community, which will have as a result the depression impacting them a lot more. The people will begin to question the validity of the government. Russia joined World War I, and for what? Russia gained very little in comparison to the death toll it suffered, and they were even forced to release Finland. Furthermore, they never got Constantinople, which was something the Russians long coveted. Soon, the provisional government will be overthrown, and a new ultranationalist regime would be installed, seeking greatness for the Russian nation. Similarly, in Germany, the ultranationalists would take power with one goal: destroy the Austrian Empire that betrayed them during the Great War. Germany would double down on their Prussian identity and begin to distance themselves from the Austrian Germans, seeing them as traitors. This nicely brings us over to the matter of the Habsburg Empire. What have they been doing all this time? Well, for the Austrians, the territory lost by the Sixtus affair would end up being a blessing rather than a curse. Many rebellious minorities which wanted independence have now been kicked out of the empire. Shortly after the war, the dual monarchy would transform into a tri-monarchy and would prove to be relatively stable. Austria is no more a great power, however, they do hold regional influence and they would continue to prosper up until the 1930s. The Great Depression would obviously hit Austria as did the rest of the world, but they'd recover and nothing too radical would happen. That is until we reach the 1930s. Germany and Italy would sign a formal military alliance which Russia would soon join. Russia would quickly move to abolish the Polish autonomy, incorporating it into Russian proper. Furthermore, Russia would prepare to go to war with Japan to recover their influence in China, while Germany would mobilize its troops, preparing for the invasion of the Austrian Empire. France and Britain support Austria, while Italy and Russia support Germany. The lines have been drawn, and it looks like Europe is heading into another great conflict. Will Germany win their expansionist war with Russia, or will the power of the Allies prevail in the end? Let me know what you think in the comments. But for now, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the content, make sure to leave a like and subscribe as it helps out the channel a lot. This was my first video, so let me know what you thought of it in the comments. And if you have any scenarios you would like me to cover, leave them down below.